Greetings, innovators and leaders. This is AI for the C-Suite, your compass for navigating the exponential age. I'm Chad Harvey, and we're here to bring you cutting-edge insights on AI tailored specifically for middle-market organizations. Buckle up as we embark on a journey through the transformative world of artificial intelligence. Today, I am delighted to welcome Richard Pierle, Managing Partner and CEO of Pier Digital Inc. From delivering newspapers in upstate New York as a teenager to the CIO and shared services leader of a Fortune 200 company, Rich brings a broad set of experiences and accomplishments across many industry verticals and roles. At Becton Dickinson, he rose to the EVP level by building a digital strategy that included automation, AI, big data, and machine learning. He did this while delivering significant synergy savings and improving customer engagement along the way. During his stints in consulting, he's been a strategic advisor to many leading organizations, including McDonald's, Walt Disney, Unilever, Cargill, and Colgate, among many others. Rich has helped them transform and deliver value through their change initiatives. Currently, Rich focuses on guiding corporations through the challenges of digital disruption by helping them move toward a new technological reality. He's also working with several promising startups in the digital space and is supported by his wife of 30 years, Stephanie, and their 2 daughters. Rich, welcome to AI for the C-Suite.
Thanks a lot, Chad. I'm glad to be here.
You know, I said we were going to start with a question about practicality, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your formative experience delivering newspapers in upstate New York. That is a classical job that I'm not sure exists anymore.
It doesn't exist anymore. So, you don't need a black swan event to know what's happened in media. And so, yeah, it was a great job, but kids nowadays have to find another way to get some of those experiences. Paper route, you learned accounts receivable, you learned accounts payable, supply chain. So it was a great job for a 12-year-old, and one that I don't know if you could do in today's society.
Agreed. And if your paper route was like mine, it was uphill almost both ways. So
Yeah. No, it was on Main Street, and I went from my house was the start of the route all the way up to Dr. McLaughlin's office. So
very good. All right. Well, instead of regaling our listeners of tales of days and jobs gone by, let's dive right in. When you and I were prepping for this conversation today, we wanted to focus a lot on practicality. I think sometimes my discussions with folks tend to go more into where the AI industry is headed and shiny object syndrome. So today we're going to try and focus on practicality. And I know that's one of your focuses when you're working with organizations on creating practical AI roadmaps for the mid-market organizations that you work with. And let's just start. What are some of the key components of an effective AI roadmap, and how do you work with executives and leaders to help them prioritize where they're going to spend their time and their resources?
So, I think where I try to get leaders, the headspace that I want to get them is starting with just, what's the problem or set of problems that you're trying to solve. So too many times, right? And we've all seen it in our experiences. You've got this great tool, right? AI. Everybody's excited about it. I think you mentioned, shiny object syndrome. That's just going on, right? And it's a reality. Everybody likes shiny objects, right? I looked it up, and it goes back to our early days. That was the sun shining off water, and that was something that everybody went to because you're thirsty, right? And I think with AI, it's this thirst for knowledge. But what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and what is the right tool set, right? Because AI is, at the end of the day, it's a tool, it's a set of tools, and what are the things that you need to do in order to get there and to leverage some of these tools. So I always start with that problem, because AI might be part of the answer, but it may be other things, right? And AI is such a broad, right? It's like change management, right? What is AI? What are those things that come, is it robotics automation? Is it big data? Is it machine learning? What are those things? that potentially could be brought to bear to solve that problem. So that's really that's the anchor point. And really, do they understand their organization, and are they able to kind of look in the mirror at themselves and say, hey, these are really the problems that we're having. And there may be a number of steps that you have to take as a leader in order to get your organization and your team ready for AI, right? And there's things that you can do, kind of on that journey. And I use the word change management, and it's with malice aforethought, because it is about change management. And is your organization ready to embark on that change journey of you've got manual processes, you've got things that may be broken. AI can help with some of that today, the way the technology works, but it may not be able to help with all of it. And so what is that tapestry of things that you need to bring to bear as a leader? And then what's your budget, right? Because most companies that I work with, it's not that they're capital constrained, it's that they have to be very, very mindful of where they spend their dollars. And so they don't have, it's not like, when you work at a large company where you've got, millions of dollars where you can spend, on what I would call science projects. Whatever companies of this size, they need it to work, and they need to be able to get, pretty quick payback on whatever they're doing, because one, they don't have enough bandwidth in their organizations to mess around with stuff, and two, they are constrained on spending a lot of money. And so how do you find the right places to spend those valuable resources so that you can get some measurable outputs, and move the dial for your organization.
Mm-hmm. The change management piece, I think, is really interesting there. And I'm interested in knowing, have you walked into many organizations, because you talked about the journey they need to go on to get prepared for this, and really maximizing the impact and the investment. But have you walked into some organizations and found that they are just not ready or equipped, and you need to lay out, say, a 12-point plan for the next 18 months, and then do these things, and then we'll come back and we'll talk again? Or do you find much of that out there?
I mean, I think that might be everybody. It's the your aspirations. I mean, and we've all used Myers-Briggs, we've used DISC, we've used different personality profiling. And so for me, I try to look at the profile of the leader, right? Are they somebody that's an innovator? Are they somebody, are they a dream? I mean, in a lot of the smaller companies, you've got a lot of really, successful entrepreneurs. So they're thinking big, right? But is their ability to execute, and their team aligned with their dream, and how do you bridge the gap? Either with improving their processes, at bringing technology, but giving them something that's achievable. One of my customers is, he's got a number of different companies, and his vision of, scaling his small company through technology and bringing in AI, it's the right vision, right? I mean, he wants AI, he wants technology to be part of his strategy, but there's certain things, right? And we started off with an assessment of, where are you, right? Because, it's a little bit of begin with the end in mind, but you have to know where you are, and you have to know where you are, practically speaking, so that you know how to get to whatever that desired end state is. So most companies, they have an idea of what their current state is, but they don't necessarily know it from a, kind of the people, process, technology, and what are the things they need to do to get, what I would say AI ready, right? And we can talk a little bit about, what that means, and some of the things, that I talk to leaders about to get them AI ready, so that they can start, leveraging some of those tools.
Mm-hmm. I would like to know more about what you advise companies and organizations and leaders about in terms of getting AI ready. I'm also interested with something you touched on there. I know that you've got experience in larger entities, and we talked about kind of resource constraints, or at least you touched on that in your remarks there. Do you find that mid-market companies and the smaller organizations have the ability to be more agile and nimble here, or are they still wedded to legacy systems like a lot of the larger entities that you've worked with are?
So I've got, right now, I have almost a tale of two customers. I've got one customer who is willing to do anything and move very quickly, right? And he might be constrained by his team's ability to move as quickly as his mind does,
Ah,
right?
mm-hmm.
Then you've got, on the other hand, a customer that has a more, financial bent. And so they're definitely wedded to their systems, but they want to understand, what are some of the things that some of the tools, and it may not be AI initially, it may be automation, right? And so automation is definitely something, that we're looking at to help advance them. And then this will potentially lead into some other tools. So it's really, getting a good assessment and understanding of where you are and how you're going to move through that as an organization, but bring people along because, these organizations have people that are really committed to the organization. I mean, that's really one of the things that I've found and excites me, kind of in the mid-market. I mean, these people have been in the organizations, they're committed, and they want to do the right thing for the leadership in these organizations. And so, how do you skill them up, right? How do you help, move them along, and get them, using the tools and adding that measurable value that the leaders are looking for, right? And I think, it's part of a system almost to bring people along on the journey, within that specific organization. And I think the organizations that can kind of figure that out, upskill their teams and evolve, right? Because I think, you know, staying where you are at any size company, I just think you're going to become that buggy whip manufacturer, right? You're going to become, that Kodak or that company that we remember the logo, but they're gone. And I think, the threat really is the little companies are going to be able to scale and actually challenge some of the much larger companies. Because I think the mid-market, they are more nimble and they have the ability to be more nimble because they don't have, that bureaucratic overhead that a lot of the companies that I've worked with historically. But I think there's, obviously some things that they're going to have to worry about, like information security.
Right. A hot topic these days, and we probably need to dedicate an episode in the future to cybersecurity, given everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's a good reminder to be continued on that thread. Let's circle back to the topic of AI readiness and what's it look like. And maybe you could just share a couple points with us from your personal checklist, and speak to that a little bit because I think that's a big question that organizations have. What do we need to do? Are we ready for this? We've got all this, fancy technology out there that's really easy to use in many instances. What do we need to do to start to leverage it? So walk us through your AI readiness.
Yeah, so I mean, where I start is with data. So it's like, in leaders, I ran into this in large companies. Everybody wants the output, the management report that tells them everything that they need to know, how to run their business.
Yeah.
But, it's the old adage of garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
And most organizations have not spent the time to keep their data clean and to actually have it where they can leverage it and they can feed it into, could be a generative AI tool, it could be machine learning, right? Especially if you're doing manufacturing, there's so many machine learning use cases out there. But your data has to be good. And so, have you, and put it in simple terms, is the information on your laptop, is it even organized? Do you have a file structure, right? Is your SharePoint organized? I can't tell you that I've ever gone into a company and been given access to a SharePoint that wasn't, what I would consider a hot mess, right? And so that is foundational, right? If you're using a tool like Copilot, what Copilot does is it looks at the files in your domain and you can start pointing it to files and creating presentations. But if you've got a lot of garbage out there, it brings back garbage. And so everybody's upset with the technology, but the foundation, that data foundation, which is so critical in this, and if you don't have it right, you're going to get a lot of false positives, and you're going to get, and what's going to happen, it's the old adoption, right? I'm going to try it a couple times, and then I'm going to say, hey, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. But the problem isn't the technology. It's your foundational information, and it's delivering you bad results. And you know they're bad because you know how your business runs. But it's starting to fix that. I would say the second thing is experimentation.
Mm.
Get, pick a couple high performers in the organization, buy the $20 a month chat GPT for them, buy Copilot for them, because the people in your organization are going to be the ones that are going to help you navigate how you can use these tools to improve the organization, right? I'm a consultant, and one of the first things that I say is, I don't know your business, right? It's not my job necessarily to know your business. Well, my job is to take the experiences of all the business I've worked with to help give you a path that is achievable, right? I always go back to SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely. And how do you use that framework with these new tools, with these new capabilities, and help your team learn into it, right? And because they're the ones that are going to find the insights and that are going to help advance this. And they're going to do it in a way that your organization can handle it. And they're going to actually help, manage the change within the organization.
Hmm. It was striking to me because I can't tell you how many conversations I've had, both on this show as well as offline and in the real world, about the lack of data readiness in organizations. And so I have to ask, since you highlighted that, when you have to deliver that message that, oh, hey, by the way, your data structure is non-existent, it's a dog's breakfast, what does that message sound like in consultant speak?
Well, I think, again, um, nobody wants to hear, that they've got an ugly baby, right? I mean, it's so you kind of have to flip it around, right? I mean, and again, I've learned from many coaching sessions, right? It's you ask the questions, right? It's do you think, the information that you have is it ready? So if you process it and you start getting stuff and then playing around with it, because when you start seeing some of the outputs, and that's why I think the experimentation and doing it in almost like a pilot mode where you're testing and you're seeing how it works. And the most important thing is to get the light going off in the leader's head with some of his key lieutenants and the people that are actually going to be doing most of the work, getting that to happen with that small group so that they can start to process how they're going to use it, because a lot of the leaders, I mean, you know I remember a time when every year the CEO would go to Davos, right? And he's like, are we, they'd have all the different AI and all these different things, and he's like, are we doing any of this? And then I'd give him the report, and then the leaders want to say that they're doing AI, but they don't necessarily always understand the implications of what that means specific to their organization. So again, how do you make it real for them, tying it to a process, tying it to specific outcomes? Back to that starting point is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? I'm always going to bring it back to the problem because that's what's going to make it tangible to help them drive. Are you trying to drive revenue? I mean, it could be your sales forecasting process, right? So what are the things that you need to do? I mean, I've got a customer right now. They don't have a sales forecasting process. So when their demand goes up and they're ramping up, the poor guy that is running their service factory, he doesn't, he doesn't have the information to scale up. And so there's things that we can do with technology. Some of it's in their core system. Some of it could be AI, right? We could, start putting inputs in and having that give, a better, or not even a better, but a forecast so that they can start to see, how they need to start staffing up. Because you with some of these roles, you can't just, turn it on in a day. There's a learning curve to get people up to speed, right? And so there's definitely things, within their end-to-end process that could leverage these technologies, but you have to get it to that point where it's real and it's not like this, what I call out of body experience for the leaders.
Yeah. No, I think those are well made points, and I'm wondering when you go into an organization, are there some common threads that you typically see where you can get some initial wins to help demonstrate the power of the different technologies, regardless of whether we're talking about business process automation or application of different type of AI tools? Are there some common areas where you typically find it's an easier lift initially, and then based on that demonstrated success, you're able to continue moving forward?
So, I mean, so the medium right now that we're on, right? So with the advent of COVID, right? Everybody, right, from, you know, hospitals, doctors, small companies, large companies, everybody went to video conferencing calls. I mean, and so one of the easiest lifts out there is these, and they call themselves AI, and there's definitely a generative AI aspect to them. But the tools that actually, transcribe the audio uh, into into a text format. If you're not using that, you're missing out. It's a huge time saver. And is it perfect? No. But does it save your team a lot of time from transcription? Absolutely. And the notes, to be honest, even if they're not perfect, they're better than the notes I ever got coming out of any meeting I've ever been in. So that's one easy example. And most of those tools start off as free, right? I mean, it's the old, we're going to give you features, and hopefully those features are going to be good enough that you're going to want to pay for them, right? There's three pieces of software as a small company right now that I pay for. I pay for Fathom AI, and there's another of note taker tools that they're all pretty good. I pay for ChatGPT, and I pay for Microsoft Copilot because I'm on Office 365. And so, they're all at different points of evolution, but I want to make sure that I'm playing around with the tools. Microsoft Copilot, I would say right now, it's typical Microsoft, right? They put it out there. I mean, I think I was reading a LinkedIn post by Mark Benioff, who I have, just a ton of respect for, right? And he's a smart guy. So, some of these industry leaders, you want to listen to what they're saying. But he said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, it's not there yet. But that's everything that Microsoft ever does,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
They push it out there, right? They sell it to death, and then they add the capabilities. And if you're not playing around with it, when they actually start adding some of the really cool capabilities, if you're not playing around with it, you miss it. And so, that's kind of I mean, look at Teams. I mean, Teams came out. I mean, I implemented it from an enterprise standpoint probably 9 years ago. It was horrible, right? It was a nightmare to implement, but it's much better. It's still, people would say I like Zoom better, or I like Google better, but it's still a good tool.
You're making me wonder if I should go into my box in the basement and dust off my old Microsoft Zune, fire up the
Yeah.
MP3s, see how that thing's aged. Since we're talking about Microsoft, and you touched on Copilot a couple times during our conversation today, I heard you loud and clear earlier when you talked and discussed about needing to have your data organized and getting that in the right space in order to properly leverage Copilot. This is an area that comes up a lot, and I'm not a Copilot expert by any stretch of the imagination. So my question to you is, when you have your data well structured and organized and Copilot is linked to it, you gave the example that you're subscribing to Copilot and using that. What are some of the best features and uses of Copilot when your data is properly structured?
I mean, I think with PowerPoint, I think there's going to be some pretty cool. I mean, again, if you're Amazon doesn't use any slides, right?
Right.
So So, but if you're doing a lot of PowerPoint, I think that that's a great use case. I also think what's happening, because I've been doing some, stuff with my customers, people don't actually know all the features of PowerPoint. So like I'm using some of it, I use Copilot, some of it I'm just using Designer. The Designer feature in PowerPoint is actually pretty powerful. So the two of those things working together is pretty cool. But it's, you know, having that library of slides and actually having your format master. I
Hmm.
can't tell you how many people don't actually have a slide master, right? So the first thing I would do is if you don't have it, make sure you got a slide master, and then have that template so that you can bring the content in. Now, is it perfect? No. But to be honest, it's a huge time saver, right? And instead of now creating the slides, it's creating slides and now you're formatting. So it's a huge time saver. And then I use I use the combination of Microsoft Copilot and ChatGPT to help me with content. I
Hmm.
mean, that's actually one of the best use cases, right? Is create. I mean, any company that's doing like policies and procedures manuals,
Hmm.
I mean, that's a huge time saver. I mean, I came out of, the medical device era. I mean, we're always doing, quality documents. We're doing this. Now, again, it's not going to do it 100% for you, but it's going to give you an outline. It's going to give you structure. It's going to give you something that you can start iterating from. The hardest part, for most of us is that initial framework. Once we have the framework, we can really start going. And that's where these AI tools really help, is that you can say, hey, give me a framework for an information security policies and procedures document. And to be honest, a lot of small companies are having to do this because they've got a big corporation that they've signed a deal with, and they've got to comply with their information security policies and procedures, but they don't have a document, you know? And so they've got to create their own document, based on the requirements provided by their. So it's a huge time saver to do that. Is it perfect? No, but it's going to, reduce your energy by, 60, 70% um, on something that you'd have to maybe pay a consultant to create. Now, you may want somebody with more experience to provide commentary on it, but it's an hour or two of that person's time as opposed to 15 hours of creation. And so those are the opportunities, because right now I think a lot of companies are just saying, I'm going to go without and I'm going to take the risk of not having that. And that's a bad strategy. I think you're going to see, again, not to get in the information security conversation, but I think you're going to see a lot more ransomware attacks. You're going to see a lot more malware. Those folks are getting smarter and smarter every day, and they're using the AI tools against you, right? So I don't want to say any more on that because I think that's a podcast in and of itself. But
I agree, and your remarks are well received and pointed there. You said a couple things I want to touch on in your last set of comments. The first is the issue of perfection, and I see this all the time. Somebody uses one of these tools and they're like, it's just not that good, or it didn't come out the way I needed it to, and it's so interesting to me because I think we have an inherent bias when it comes to human work versus work from an automated or semi-autonomous system, or even just a basic generative AI chatbot. And I think we need to start to evolve our thinking about that in some ways.
well, so I we implemented at BD a chatbot. And one of the things that people don't realize is it's like a person. You
Hmm.
got to train it.
Yep.
So you have to think about AI as an employee.
Right.
And with every employee in your organization, now I get it, right? And we've all as leaders done this. Hey, let's just throw Sally in and they'll figure it out.
Right.
Right? Sally, she's smart. She went to a really good college. She'll get it done. We don't, because a lot of the training materials, are adequate maybe at best,
Hmm.
but we have great people and great people do great things and they'll figure it out. Well, guess what? AI doesn't work that way.
Nope.
you've got to train it. You've got to give it the information in your organization so that it can start to deliver the outcomes and the outputs that you desire based on your policies, your procedures. And most organizations, their process documentation is non-existent. Their training materials are, adequate. I was being generous.
Yes.
And so, and so those are things that you have to understand. And it can take, it took us probably, I want to say 12 to 14 weeks of training the AI. Now, again, this was, 9 years ago, right? But even with the advancements, it's still going to take you time to get that, and that got us to where the chatbot was dealing with 93 to 95% of the calls in an automated way, which is pretty good. You're still going to have some exception fallout, but okay, that takes a lot of pressure off the people that are remaining to do that work. And so that's what you've got to work through is it's an employee and you've got to train it. And if you don't train it well, you're going to get bad results and you're going to be disappointed and you're going to feel like you wasted your money.
Well said. I don't want to leave the subject of talent and employees, but I'm going to put a pin in that momentarily because I want to highlight something that you brought out in your comments a few moments ago, which I think is really important. And I wanted to shine a light on it. I asked you about the journey essentially and how folks can begin to better leverage Copilot. And you put a layer in there that you hadn't articulated before, which I think is really important. You talked about making sure the data is in order.
Yep.
Then you threw out something new, which I think too many folks overlook, which is understanding the capabilities of the tools that you've already got before
Right.
you then start hooking up the AI. And you talked about the slide master with respect to PowerPoint. And I think that is a really critically overlooked area in a lot of these conversations because most folks, I remember going back 15 years, we had to pay for basic Excel training for a lot of our customer
Sure.
service folks that were manipulating data because we just assumed they knew how to use it. They didn't, right?
Right.
And I think understanding and leveraging to the max ability the tools that you've already got is a really important point. So I wanted to say thanks for bringing
Yeah,
that
no,
out.
we used to call it the field of dream strategy, right? If you buy it, right, if you buy a piece of software, they'll figure it out. And the software today, right? And I've been fortunate enough, right? I mean, my career I ended up in IT, but I started my career in finance and accounting. And so I started on Lotus 1, 2, 3. And so I'm a spreadsheet person, so I'm always going to start with Microsoft Excel, right? And I saw the evolution of Lotus 1, 2, 3 to Excel. And so the amount of functionality that's in these tools is crazy, right? Of what you can do with them. But, people, and we know this, people are using, maybe, 5 to 7% of the functionality in the tools. And so, so rather than, leveraging some of the existing functionality, I just want something new because it's fun,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's using the new and what you have together, right? It's that augmentation. That's really what's powerful, I think, with these tools.
Yep. Well said. All right. I promised I was going to circle back to an employee question with respect to talent since you started touching on that. I'm interested in knowing, in your experience growing teams at BD and elsewhere, what approaches work and what works best, really, for developing internal AI talent versus bringing in external expertise? As one of my guests said in a recent episode, I enjoy being at the bottom of a very steep learning curve, but she's in the minority. Most folks don't like being at the bottom of that learning curve. So when we're contemplating internal talent and how we nurture it and develop it versus external talent, what's been your experience there in terms of what works?
Well, I think it starts with knowing your people, right? I mean, you know, most employee populations that I've run across, right? Now, everybody's going to say they love their people, everybody's great, but it's a normal distribution curve. It's almost always a normal distribution curve. You've got your A players, your B players, so on and so forth. And so it starts with where do you want to invest in your team? It's probably the A and B players, right? And depending on where those people are, right? Sometimes the eight players all loaded up and maybe you need to pick, but it's picking those people with, with malice of forethought and bringing them up because those people in theory are going to be your future leaders. And so they're going to bring those capabilities and they're going to instantiate them in the organization over time, right? I mean, I've been through so many organizational transformations. And when I was at AT&T, I had this guy working for me, Tony, right? And Tony was the best guy in the world at doing manual journal entries, but he was never going to be an analyst. He was never going to be, and he was okay with that, right? I mean, not everybody's going to, move up. And I think it's sometimes leaders push people that are great workers into thought leadership positions that they can't do. Just because you can crank out a lot of work doesn't necessarily mean that you can do some of these higher value added things. And this is where leaders need to make sure, they're picking the right person for the future roles, right? And they have to be, smart about it. I mean, and so I think I would say common sense, but I've found common sense isn't so common, right? But it's making sure that you're putting the right person in, and so that they and your organization can be successful because nobody wants their people to fail, right? I mean, that's a horrible leader.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Something else that occurs to me as you're talking here about how well equipped folks are in selecting the right people. It's something I've run into only once or twice, but I'm interested since you see a lot of organizations. Do you find many individuals or departments or entities where there's resistance to some of the AI-driven change and some of the new models that we're looking at deploying and bringing into the workspace? Have you run into much of that?
So, I think it's almost for me, it's a tale of two sizes of organization. I see uh, resistance, and I've seen historically in much larger organizations that have a very hardened bureaucracy because the people have figured out how to make the bureaucracy work for them, right? And so a change is a disruption to fiefdoms, to power, how power's been distributed. And so, you need a very strong CEO, and it really has to come from the CEO on because most of what we're talking about, all of it underpins change, right? And so you need a very strong leader. I mean, at BD, we were fortunate enough with Vince. I mean, he knew that in order for us to survive and thrive, that we needed to change as an organization. And he provided the umbrella and air cover for senior management to make those changes and transform, BD. In the smaller companies, I think people are so overwhelmed with the work that they have that they're dying for change. They know, like, I mean, both, of the, my most recent customers, the people are at 120, 135% capacity of work. They've got so much, they want these tools. They want the workloads to be pulled off of them. So they're begging for it from their leadership, right? So I think it's very different. And so they're looking for, in many instances, a lifeline to help them do more with the same. And that's what leadership wants, right? Because, they have the work coming in, right? And so they need more ways to do more faster.
Mm-hmm. Well said. So continuing that idea of the lifeline and doing more faster. Obviously, most mid-market organizations are not going to go out and spend the time and the money and the resources to build their own AI model or their own AI solutions. They're going to rely on trusted vendors and providers. So what are some of the criteria and some of the check boxes that you would recommend based on your advisory background that mid-market execs and leaders use when they're evaluating these different vendors and solutions?
So again, I'm going to always bring you back to what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? So because I see too many, again, it's the old, I've got a hammer and I'm looking for a nail, right? Don't start there. Everybody that I work with, I always coach them, do an assessment. I can come in, somebody else can come in, they can do a pretty quick assessment of interview your team because again, that's also part of the change. So I'll come in, I'll interview every person that they tell me to on the team. I record it. I let everybody know I'm recording it, right? I synthesize it. And then with all that information, the people tell me what the problems are, right? And the leaders inherently know the problems, but now it's real. It's on paper. And I play back the assessment not to the leader first. I play it back to the team to make sure I got it right because I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. I'm infallible. So then it's okay, what is this? So now I've got the assessment. Now let's look at your strategy. What are you trying to accomplish as an organization? Many organizations, so when I ask what your strategy is, it's like, well, it may not be written down, right? Um, and then we start to say, okay, but with those two, let's start talking about a roadmap, right? Let's start talking about what you're doing and how we get from your current, it's the old current state to future state, right? And what does that future state look like to you? And we do it with that small group of people because those are the people that are going to actually execute on it and do it. And then at that point, we can start talking about tools. I never start with tools. I hate talking about tools first because it's I don't even know, I don't go into it thinking I'm going to use this tool or I'm going to use that tool. That's like horrible because and then again, if you're a software company, that's how you sell, right? And they have a tool and they're trying to convince you that this tool is going to solve your problem and it may or may not, right? And so let's make sure we understand the problem and then we can start thinking about what are the right tools to get after this problem, but we're going to bounce that against the backdrop of your existing tools. This is very, very important because most companies, they get sold on, well, I'm running QuickBooks. I'm running QuickBooks online, and I think I need to put SAP in. I mean, and I'm using an extreme example, right? You're a manufacturing company. Maybe you're a $50 million manufacturing company. That's a big deal. SAP is not, I mean, I've remediated many failed SAP implementations, right? That's a lot of money. And do you understand? So I'm going to try to figure out how to make what they have work, right? Unless their, heart is set on putting SAP in. But I want to make sure they understand, the trail of tears that they may encounter on going through a transition and transformation like that. Because again, I've seen too many times where you create this great project that you can't do because of the skill set of your team, because of where you are, because of your budgetary constraints. And so all of those things need to be considered, right, for the organization because it has to be again back to smart. It's got to be achievable for the organization. So maybe you want that $5 million piece of software, right? It's the old, I want a Rolls Royce, but I can only afford a Prius, right? Well, let's figure out the right Prius for you, and how do we make that work for your organization and deliver the best outcomes for you given those constraints. And that's really the role of a good advisor is to challenge the team on what's possible and not destroy their dreams and visions of what they want to do, but put it in a framework that they can actually achieve it, right? Because that's, I mean, for me, you know, dreaming big and failing on putting something in, that's failure. That's a failure on if I'm involved, that's a failure on me. And I've hurt that company because now they're behind the eight ball, right? And so I want to make sure that whatever we decide we want to do is doable, whether it's AI, whether it's a new system, whether it's some combination thereof.
I'm really glad that your remarks focused on the result that you want to achieve, because I can't tell you how many times I've walked into an organization or got questions at the end of a presentation or an address about, well, which tool is best, and it's always timeout, right? That's the wrong conversation. So it sounds like you're doing right by your clients. Um, I know that our time is starting to run short here, and I'm interested in a couple things here. With respect to your continuing education, right, and staying sharp, what are you reading? What are you looking at? What sources of information are you following that other folks might be interested in to help them stay abreast of a lot of the changes that are occurring right now?
Yeah, so I mean, like everybody else, I read, all the different, management books and leadership books. Um, I like to listen to, some of the big brains in the industry. I like to hear what Satya at Microsoft is saying, right? I like to listen to guys like Mark Benioff. Um, you know, I like to to be honest, I like to sometimes get into the details on uh, on ChatGPT, on how people at the ground level are using these tools, right? And so it's getting a kind of, I mean, you go to YouTube and it's very interesting on, people are using it in different ways. And so there's so much knowledge out there, right? And how do I get to, the truth, right? I mean, I always harken back to the X-Files, right? I mean, the truth is out there. You've just got to find it, and you have to find it for yourself on your terms because I'm one of those people, I don't trust what people say. And so I always need to triangulate. So, maybe I'll listen to 50% of Mark Benioff says. Maybe there's a content creator that I'll listen to 30. I mean, and you've got to take all those inputs and figure out, okay, now how am I going to talk to my customer and how am I going to advise them, right? As to the things that they should do because it's very no person can have all of the knowledge of what's going on in their brain and there's so many inputs, right? It's the signal to noise. There's so much noise, right? And so how do I filter it so that I actually am getting information that I can use and I can leverage, right? And I think, that's one of the challenges I think leaders have today is who do I listen to? Who is that person that is going to give me practical, usable advice, right? And maybe it's a board member, right? Maybe it's and so that's probably, back around is who are the people that those leaders are listening to and and do they have the right skill set given where, does your board have somebody that is current with technology? What I find a lot of boards is there's a lot of folks that are more senior and they may not be as fresh with some of the stuff that's going on. It doesn't mean they're not smart people, right? They're super smart, but are they connected to, what's going on at a more detailed level? A lot of times their knowledge it may be, maybe 20 years out of date, at the operational level.
Hmm. That's spot on. It's how fresh is your experience, not how bright you are.
Yeah.
Given the different thought leaders that you mentioned that you're listening to, and since we've got folks listening to us here looking for insight, based on what you're hearing in this space and from other thought leaders, what types of trends, maybe even specific to AI, since this podcast does focus on that, do you think execs and leaders should be thinking about and preparing for in the next 2 to 3 years? Again, based on what you're seeing out there from the thought leaders that you're listening to and paying attention to.
Um, so first I would say, look at your industry. Every industry is on a little bit different trajectory, So if you're in manufacturing, right, and you're in a very specific niche of manufacturing, what are your competitors doing? Um, you know, I go to, different, trade shows, different events. I try to stay connected probably more to healthcare. So like I'll go to HIMSS, right, which is a big it's a big healthcare uh, you know uh, down in Florida, trade show in Florida. And so I'll go visit all the booths, right? And I'll say, to myself, is this real or is this, kind of vaporware, right? Because I'm always, I'll ask questions and I have enough knowledge that I can tell if if it's a dream or if it's something they can actually do. And so I recommend leaders getting out there to those shows as part of their regular process so that they can, it's like it's the old management by walking around, right? And I think with technology, that's actually made it a little bit harder. I think we have to find a way to do management by walking around a little differently. It's video calls, it's things like that, but it's also going out to some of these industry shows so that you have a touch point with that. I also think it's networking groups. I think networking groups have become much more important in a virtual world. I think, I'm a Vistage member. I mean, I think, it doesn't have to be that, but who are the people in those networks that you are connected to that you can have like in what I would call adult conversations with, right? And I think those adult conversations are super important. I know, again, when I was at BD, as a CIO, it's not like you can talk to your boss about some of this stuff, right? And who can you talk to, right, and bounce things off of in a safe way? I don't really think there's enough of that, right? Especially for CEOs. You can't go to your board, right? You really can't, right? And so who are those people that are going to keep your confidence, but at the same time give you some ideas that you can do something with. And I think that's super important is to have that, support system, that safe support system, because you can't know it all.
Right. No. Again, well said. Rich, these conversations always go so fast. I feel like we run out of time. It's very easy for me to understand why some podcasts go 2, 3 hours. We're about at time. So, with that said, number one, I really appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. This was a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. As we wrap up, is there one other piece of advice that we haven't surfaced here regarding practical applications that you'd like to give out to C-suite execs, or maybe something you mentioned in our conversation earlier today that you'd like to return to and perhaps underscore a little bit further?
I mean, it's, I started with the problem statement. I think, making sure that you've got that clear. And then I would, if you're not using any of the tools right now, you know, play around with ChatGPT. Play around with some of these tools. They're not expensive, right? And and block, if you're a CEO, block 1 hour of your week, right? You're probably working 60 hours, maybe 70, maybe 80, but block 1 hour on your calendar, Friday afternoon, whatever, with your favorite beverage, and play around with ChatGPT, play around with some of these tools. They're not hard, right? I think too many times people are intimidated by some of the technology. Don't be intimidated by it. And if you are, find one of your bright, younger people in your organization and have them help it. Use it as a reverse mentoring opportunity. I'm a big believer in that. Some of the younger people that I've worked with, they know a lot more, and it's an opportunity to create a connection that is a win for both of you. So
Fantastic advice. So, to that end, and in the spirit of connection, for our listeners that want to learn more about your work, get in touch with you, find out about your company, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would say, send me an email. I mean, I like to connect. It's Richard.Perle, Pierle, at PeerDigital.com, and I'd love to chat and hear your story.
Fantastic. And again, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. I had a really enjoyable time with you, and hopefully our listeners also gain a lot of value from this conversation. So thank you.
No, and thank you for having me, Chad. I enjoyed the conversation as well.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, thank you once again for tuning into AI for the C-Suite, where we're committed to helping middle market leaders thrive during the exponential age. If you found value in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on all the socials, and visit our site, aiforthecsuite.com. Join us next time as we continue to unlock the potential of AI for your organization. And until then, keep your algorithms running, your leadership evolving, and your AI in check. Take care, everybody.